Hello. So Godot's user interface system is very confusing and everybody knows it, but I think I found a way to explain and demonstrate Godot's very powerful UI tools in a way that is really beneficial to everyone. So I thought it would be really nice to create a tutorial here on YouTube covering this topic, where we will go over some of the basics in example 1, then create this basic color changing menu example in example 2, where the buttons interact with each other along with the game while keeping everything neat and learning so much about how UI works. Then in example 3, we will cover how to customize your themes, as well as quickly going over some alignment strategies to get exactly what you're looking for with UI and Godot. But just quickly before we get started, I would love to ask if you could subscribe so that YouTube can push this tutorial on UI to more aspiring game developers who want to learn to create their own Godot games as well. So I want to break down UI just a little bit more before we get into the examples. And a couple things that I want to mention are that we need to learn to make use of the toolbar layout presets when positioning our control nodes, as it makes things easier and gives us a point to return to in case something does happen. And control nodes will almost always be our main node because they have the ability to give the children of that control node properties and functions that they need to work fully. We will set the layout of our parent control node to full rect almost all of the time. This is going to allow everything within that control node to auto adjust based on the screen resolution. And alignment can be weird because of how it's split up, so I'll dedicate most of example 3 to alignment because there is so much to go over with this. But in the big scheme of things, the UI in Godot is very powerful and easy to use. But that is only if you know how to use it, because if not, well, it is very counterintuitive and doesn't make much sense at all. Okay, so this is example 1. In example 1, I want to go over the very basics, like what different nodes in here do. So if we go and we create a brand new scene up here at the top, you're going to see that we have the basic root nodes, right? A 2D scene, 3D scene, or a user interface. Well, we're going to go with the user interface, right? And it's going to add us a control node to our scene tree. If we click on the plus, we're going to come down here and we're going to see different things in the control category, like containers, color rects. We've all probably used a color rect. We've all probably used a rich text label and different things of that nature. But we have things like containers, right? And containers are going to be storing things like a container does. We're going to end up using the grid container in this video, but containers are kind of like, they're going to arrange the children. So if we have a grid container and we have 3 children under that grid container, well, it's going to arrange them in a whatever specific pattern we create, right? So if we have a grid container, you can see that we can set the column number. Maybe we want 3 columns in the grid container, right? But maybe we want them to be spaced out more than they are. Obviously, you can't see anything now because we don't have any children in there, so it has nothing to sort. But maybe we have 3 columns, and we come down here to our theme override constants, and we can change the separation between the horizontal level and the separation between the vertical level to make it more unique and to make a little gap in between each of the children nodes. Usually in a grid container, you're going to use panels, because if you use something else, it's not really going to work. So let's say you want to have, like in the example that we create in example 2, like you saw in the intro, that had the 9 panels at the top that were all different colors. Well, those were used by grid container, and then we would do panel 1. And then inside of panel 1, we would have a color rect. And that's how it would be. See? So it's going to show a color rect, and we have 1, right? But let's say we have, maybe we want a second panel. Well, we're going to duplicate it just for this video, and we can make it a different color. But if we go up to our grid container and we have 3 columns, let's say we want 1 column. Well, it's going to put it down because we only have 1 column. Let's say we have 2 columns though, right? That makes more sense. And then we can come down here to the horizontal separate, and we can extend this by 100, and you're going to see how it's going to store these objects. Maybe we can take panel 1 and we can copy and paste it again. And it's going to go here into panel 3. If we go up to the layout of our grid container, we can change it to 3 columns, and you're going to see that it's going to space them out perfectly. That's kind of how a container works. Obviously, we're going to go over this more in depth in example 2 when we're actually using it. That was just a very basic example. But we have a bunch of different stuff in here. For example, in our control area, here, we're going to have things like maybe buttons, which we're going to have a ton of different buttons, some that have their own functionalities here, like custom functionalities. Or we're going to have basically the base buttons, some buttons that we're going to end up using in this video, right? So we're going to end up using the check button here. It's kind of like a toggle. Same with this, the checkbox is also kind of like a toggle. But these are normal buttons up here, and these are different type of buttons, right? So that's pretty cool. And then we're going to end up going and using a bunch of this stuff, like a 9-patch rect, which are kind of cool. So all this stuff has its own functionality and it's all unique. But if we drag a piece of art down here into our 9-patch rect texture, you're going to see, well, it looks kind of the same. If we drag that same piece of art out, you're going to see it's bigger, but that doesn't really matter, right? Because we can scale our 9-patch rect to whatever size we want. And you're going to see how it kind of looks and it kind of moves in the exact same fashion, right? Where it extends the edges. But if we go back, we go to our 9-patch rect, our patch margins, and we set the left to 3. We set the top to 3. We set the right to 3. And we set the bottom to 3. You're going to see how it's changing, right? It's pulling the edges out and it's keeping just the center, and it's expanding the center. If we grab the edges and we move it around, you can kind of see how we can make boxes of art. If we were to try to make this into that same box, you're going to see it's going to look very funky, right? But with the 9-patch rect, it's going to end up keeping the edges. Now, if we reset all this, it's going to go back to what it would have normally looked like. So with the 9-patch rect, we were able to make it look like that. We were able to change it from this into, right, the 3, the 3, the 3, the 3, and the 3, right? So you can kind of see the difference. That's how 9-patch rect works. And basically all this stuff in here is going to have its own kind of functions just like that. But let's get into example 2, where we're going to actually create our in-game example. Okay, so now in example 2, I want to create a basic pop-up menu screen with different buttons that interact with each other. As you can see, if we toggle a button, it changes the background, but it also changes the toggle of all the other ones to false. This is going to be a lot of info here, so let's just get started. And to get started here, let's create a user interface scene here with our control node. And if we click on the control node, we can rename it. We'll just name this control-example2 because this is going to be example 2 in this video. And we're going to get started by actually creating the background color. So what do we want for the background? Well, let's say that this is our game, right? So our game can be a color rect, and this will just, for example, be our game. But our game right now is white and it's not lined up, right? So for this color rect, this is part of the UI class. So this is a UI item, and it works like most of the other UI items. The control node works as kind of a container. So as you can see, this is the size of the control node. What do we want to do with this color rect? Well, if we go to layout and we go to transform, we can see that we have all the basic transform stuff. But if we go up here to layout mode, we can change it from position, so it doesn't use this position, and it uses anchors. And we can anchor it to different areas. So maybe the top right, see, and it's going to anchor in the top right of this control node. But what if we wanted to find the exact center? Well, if we click on center, it's going to put it in the exact center. But for this example, we're going to do a full rect, and it's going to make it the perfect size of our screen. So we don't have to expand it and try and get the perfect size. I'm going to make this color rect a bit darker by changing the color to a darker gray, just so it's not as hard on the eyes. And then on our control node, to actually create our menu, we're going to use a 9-patch rect. Now this 9-patch rect is actually going to be our menu. So we can rename this, and this is going to be named our color menu, because this is going to be the menu. Everything that is in the menu is going to be under this 9-patch rect. We have an art folder. This art is able to be downloaded in the link below on my itch.io page. So if you want to go get this art, you can go download it there. And we can take this menu background, we can drag it into the 9-patch rect. And like we talked about in the deeper explanation section, if we were to move it, it doesn't look that well. But if we go over here to the patch margin and we change everything to maybe 3, well, everything is going to look much better, because if we do 1, for example, you're going to see how it changes. But what this does is, and these parts here are still going to end up stretching weird. Or I guess they won't, because it depends on how many pixels. But from the bottom is because our right is still 3. So it's going to keep all the ones on the right, and the bottom is not. But if we were to do this as 1, well, you're going to see how that looks. And it looks kind of weird. But that's because it only saves the 1 pixel. But you can see here, this would, I think it was like 2 pixels and 2 pixels up, 2 to the side, 2 up, 2 to the side, right? So you can kind of see how all these pixels here are not classified because they're not the 1 to the right. This is the line of 1 pixel. So that's the one it's going to store. But if we do 3, then it's going to get all of those, and it's going to look pretty neat. Or I guess it's 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. But it's going to look pretty neat, right? And then this here is actually going to be our menu size. We can make this menu however big we want it. The layout, the transform, you can change the size here, or you can change the size here, right? It doesn't really matter, but we can make it however big we want it. Maybe something like this works. And then if we want to center this directly in the center, we can go up here to the layout mode, just like we did with the color rect, and we can center it in the middle of our control node. So we can do anchors, and we can center it. But here's where things are going to get a little bit more, different. So this 9-patch rect here, as you can see, has its own yellow box, has its own outline. So if we were to add a child to it and we were to do this anchor thing, it's going to position it to the top right, top left, bottom left, or bottom right, or center of this 9-patch rect, not of the control node, because it's a child of the 9-patch rect. So let's add, for example, a vertical box container. This is going to be what we're going to use to store our buttons, but you can see it in the top left of our color menu. If we were to go here and we were to go to layout, position, anchors, and we were to go to the bottom, you can kind of see how it moves the box around just like that, right? But for now, we can just leave it at the top left, and we can reset the anchors because we don't need it for now. We just want to go and create our buttons. So in our vertical box container, what do we want to store in this container? This is going to make more sense whenever we position this container where we want it. But what do we want in this container? Well, we're going to want our buttons. So if we go to buttons, we can grab this check button. And this check button, I'm going to end up naming check button 1 because we're going to have 3 different ones. The text here is going to be color number 1. And this is going to be a pretty basic button because we're not going to go over theme and we're not going to go over customization in this example. But that's going to be example 3, and we'll go and we'll customize this exact scene a little bit more. But you can see color 1, this is our button. This kind of looks good. I want to go down here to the visibility. I want to change the self-modulate to black, just so it fits more the theme of the game. And you can kind of see that this is a button. But if we click play on the scene, well, let's save our scene to, control example 2, that's fine. And we play it. This is our menu. You can see color 1, if we click it, this black box pops up around it. You're going to see that if we have multiple buttons, that's not going to look good at all. I don't think it looks good now. But if we want to take that off, we can go to check button. We can come down here to theme overrides, right? And then style. And we can change the focus to a new style box empty. So this is how you can kind of customize everything a little bit more, right? But if we click play, you can kind of see that that box is now gone because we set it to equal to empty. You can put a custom one. You can do whatever you want, right? But we put empty. So now we have a working button. Let's go and let's copy and paste this button 3 different times. So we have 3 different ones. Let's change the text on each one. You can see how they stay in order. Let's also make sure the container is the exact size of our buttons, right? Because if not, it will look weird and it won't center properly, but it is. So it's the exact size. We can go to our container. We can go to the layout mode here. We can click on anchors. Maybe we want to do the center, but we want to do maybe the center bottom, and then we want to raise it just a little bit. Whoops, that's the size, but the position, maybe we can go to like 120 for the position, maybe a little bit lower, maybe 130, maybe like 135, right? We'll stay there. Okay, so our buttons are now positioned. But now we want to go to our color menu. Let's add another container, right? So this is how UI kind of works. It's all about containers. It's just a ton of containers lapped on top of each other. This is one container, see? That container stores the buttons. This container is going to store the little squares that we have at the top. And like we went over earlier, we have to use panels because if we use a color rect, well, it's not going to end up showing. So if we grab a panel and we add the panel to the color grid, we can name this panel 1. In our panel, what if we add a color rect to this, right? It's going to make the box visible. So now we're going to have a visible box. Now here you could end up putting whatever you want. Maybe you just want a icon, or maybe you want more buttons. Maybe you want an icon. Maybe you want different tabs, maybe different menus where you can use buttons, or you can use other different things for that, right? But for this, I would just want to go over how to create like a little visual for it. Maybe you wanted 9 different images. Maybe you wanted your inventory. I created a inventory a while back, and how do we create an inventory? Well, we ended up using a grid container for each inventory slot, and it used a panel, and then we had not this under it, but we had a Sprite 2D under it, so we could make an icon, right? So there was a Sprite 2D within the panel, so we could change it. But for this, we're just going to use a color rect to keep everything basic, and we're going to change the color rect to color maybe to a darker blue, maybe something like that. I guess that's more of a purple, but it's going to work for this, right? We can take panel 1 for now, and we can just copy and paste it 3 times, and then one more time. One more time, this is going to be the 4th panel, so it's going to end up being on the 2nd row, so we can change the color a little bit to maybe a lighter purple, just like that. And we can take this panel and paste it 3 more times. On panel 7, we can change the color again. We can go to more of a even lighter purple, and we can paste this one 3 more times. or just 2 more times. And you can kind of see that it's going to have a row of them, right? Maybe if we hide this one, you can kind of see how it works, right? So it takes that out of the grid. But the grid here only has 1 column, and that's why it does that. If we click 2 columns, well, it's going to do that. 3 columns, it's going to be even because we have 3 rows, right? So this is going to be a 3x3 square if we were to separate these. How do we separate them? Well, we go to theme overrides and we change the constants. Now the theme, of course, we're going to go over themes here in a minute. In example 3, we'll go over themes and how that works. But for now, we can go to our theme override and we can copy it. Maybe we can do 45, 45, and it's going to space them out pretty nicely. And how do we make this more centered in the screen? Well, the grid container, just like the vertical box container, is able to be moved around. But I want to go over one thing here. If we go to layout and we do the anchor thing and we click on maybe the center, you're going to see that it's not going to be centered. And well, why is that? Well, if you see this orange square, the outline of this container, the container is only this big. The contents of this container is much bigger than the actual container. So if we were to expand the container to be the size of what's in the container, and then we were to go reset the position anchors and then maybe click on the center, you're going to see that it's going to actually center it up this time. Maybe we want to go to the center top, and then we can change the transform, the position, to maybe 40, or that's the size, but the position to maybe like 10, right? That looks good. And then we can move our buttons down, so we can go to our box container and we can move these down by 10. Or whoops, that's the size again. I keep messing with the size, which isn't good, but we can move the size of this to 145. You can see we move that down, maybe a little bit more, maybe like something like that, right? So that is a menu, and that is how we just move those around just like that. Now, I want to go and I want to create a script for our color menu here. So this script is going to be what controls everything in our game. So if we go to our color menu, we click on the script and we say color menu.gd, we can create a brand new script. And in this script, we're going to remove everything that we already have. So this script is basically going to be the code. First of all, let's create the little opening and closing. How are we going to open and close the menu? Well, we're not going to use a physics process or a process function or anything like that because it is UI. So none of that is really needed. But before we get started, I want to create some variables up here. I want to create one onReady variable. And this variable, it's going to be multiple onReady variables, but one onReady variable that says button 1. And this is just going to be our check button 1, right? Just so we can have access to all the buttons. And then we're going to do this for all 3 of our buttons, just like this, and button 2 and button 3, and the path to button 2 and the path to button 3. And then one more onReady variable. This onReady variable, though, is going to be our background color. So we can say onReady var background color equals and the path of our background color. So we're actually going to have to get parent dot get node and get our background color. Or I guess we never named it. Okay, so we're gonna rename it in just a second though. Background color, right? So that's our background color, which is actually going to be our color rect up here. So we can rename this to our background color. And now we're going to create our first function. This function is going to just be a basic input function. So we can say input dot our input event. And inside of here, we're just going to say if event dot is action pressed. And we can use the UI accept key. That's fine. So every time we click the accept button, what do we want to do? Well, we want to toggle the menu, which is going to be a function. And we're going to create a new function down here, which is going to be to toggle the menu. And toggling the menu is actually going to be extremely easy. So how are we going to open and close the menu? Well, up here, let's create one more variable real quick. And this variable can be var self-opened. So we can know if the menu is opened or not. And I guess when we start, it can be equal to false. But if we toggle menu, we can say self-open is equal to the opposite of self-open, right? So the self-open is going to just equal the opposite. So if it's equal to true, then we're going to close it. If it's equal to false, then we're going to open it, right? So we can just down here check quickly if self-opened is true, then we can say self.visible equals true, right? And then else self.visible equals false. And now we should have a working function, right? So we should be able to open and close the menu. So if we go to color menu, we click on this eyeball. What that's going to do is hide the menu, and then we click play. Well, you can see that if we click enter, it's going to open. If we click enter, it's going to close. We can interact with it and everything like that. And it is going to interact however we interact with it, right? But we can open and close the menu. So now we want to go with the buttons. Now we're going to go back into our code and we're going to create the button thing. So what are going to be able to do is be able to, if we click the button 2, let's say we have button 1 checked and we click button 3. Well, we want button 1 to automatically unchecked, and we also want it to change the background. So how are we going to do that, right? Well, we can go to our check button and we can send a node signal of pressed to our color menu. And we can do that for every single one of these. Just like this, pressed to the color menu. And then now that we have all these functions, in each function, we're going to want to, first of all, handle the button pressed and whatever the button press is going to do, right? So the button press is going to end up changing the color. So if we come down here, we make one more function. This function is going to be to handle the button press, right? And we're going to have a pass-through variable, so we know what button that we're dealing with, right? And we can set up the colors. Real quick, I'm going to set up the colors quickly just by grabbing that of our grid container panel1.color, right? Just so we can just grab the exact color from our panel. So this is going to take the color from panel 1. And then what color is the color 2, right? Well, color 2 is going to be the exact, it's not going to be the second panel, it's not going to be the third panel, but it's going to be the fourth panel, right? Because it is going to end up being this panel, the fourth. Then we need the seventh panel there. So to do that, well, it's going to be the exact same thing, except instead of color 2 here, it's going to be color 3, and the panel is going to end up being 7. And to change the color of the background, well, it's going to be very, very simple. We can say if button is equal to whatever we pass through. So I guess the first key is 1. That means button 1. And we can say background color dot color equals color 1, right? Then we can say if button is equal to 2. Then we can say background color dot color is equal to color 2, right? And then it's going to be the exact same for color 3. But if button is 3 and color is 3, right? So now what do we want to happen whenever we click a button? Well, first of all, we want to call this function. So we want to call the handle button pressed, and we want to pass through 1, right? Because this is the very first button. And we're going to end up wanting to call this function for every single button. So no matter what button we hit, we want to call that function, right? But if we click button 2, then we want to pass through 2. And if we click button 3, then we're going to want to end up passing through 3, right? And what else are we going to want to do? Well, we are going to want to, this is all we're going to have for up here. Whoops. But this is all we're going to have for these functions, right? So we're just going to end up calling the handle button press. What else do we want to happen if we close it? Or if we change the color? Well, we're going to want to turn off the other buttons. So if we hit button 1, what do we want to happen? Well, we want to turn button 2 off. So we can say button.set pressed no signal to false. So what this is going to do is automatically going to set button 2 to false without sending the button was clicked signal. So if we take this, we copy it, we paste it, we can say button 3. And then down here we can say, well, if we click button 2, then we want to set button 1 to false, and we also want to set button 3 to false. And if we click button 3, then we're going to want to set button 2 to false, and we're also going to set button 1 to false. So now if we click play, everything should technically work. If we click play, the screen's automatically going to be on. So if we go back and we hide it, click play, no screen. We click enter, it's going to pop up a menu. We click enter again, it's going to close the menu. We pop it up and we click on color 2. It's going to change the background and it's going to check the box. If we close the menu, we can close it. If we open it, we can open it. Let's say we want color 3. Well, we click on color 3, it's going to check 2 off automatically and it's going to change the background. If we want color 1, it's going to see, it's going to check off the color based on whatever we want. We can never have 2 selected at once. So it's like a toggle, and then we close it, come back, everything is the exact same. So this could be like a basic settings menu, but this is what this is kind of how we create a pop-up menu. This is the basics of a pop-up menu here in Godot. And so that is example 2, a basic pop-up menu where we can go and we can change the different colors and they all interact with each other like a menu should interact with. But when creating UI, you're probably going to want to customize things and make it more custom to your exact theme and the style of your game. So the only thing in this that's customized is this little border here, which isn't very custom because it's just a 9-patch rec. But how are we gonna go over custom stuff? Well, that's what example 3 is for. So let's get into example 3. Let's go over customization. Let's go over a little bit more of alignment and just learn more about UI. Okay, so here in example 3, I want to go over some of the basic customization tips and then a little bit of alignment again. But if we look at our, let's say we get our check button 1, right? So the very first button. If we go to theme overrides, we're going to see that we're going to have colors, which we can actually use now without having special art. And to do that, if we go to our visibility, we turn the self-modulate off, you're going to see it's going to make it back to white. But here we're going to have the font color. So the base font color, maybe we want the base font color to be black. We can make it black, right? Maybe if we want to, like when the buttons clicked or whenever the buttons kind of hovered over, we will want it to be white maybe. And if we click play, you can kind of see how this is going to work. If we hover over the button, it's going to change it into white for that moment. And then basically, I mean, you can just go down and read all these. This is the outline color if you want to have an outline. This is the, if the button's disabled, the button's never going to be disabled in our game, so it's kind of hard to do that. This is going to be the focus color, so kind of the same thing as what we just had. And you can kind of see that it's not really going to do anything until we click it. And then if we unclick it, you're going to see that it's going to say that because that's the last thing we were focused on, right? So it's going to be red because we focused on that last. And that's why it's going to be that. If we go to button 3, we click it, you're going to see that that red completely disappears and it's gone now. But it all works a little bit different, right? So you can go through these. This is just basic stuff here. But constants, this is separation. So this is kind of what we went over with the grid container. If we go down, we have the fonts. This is how you import fonts. So instead of having this blurry font here, you can have your own text, that's super, super important for your game, right? So that's number 1. But you can just go on Google and you can just load a font file or download a font file from any of the font websites that make fonts, and you can just drag and drop it just like you would drag and drop this icon into a texture, right? So that's how easy the fonts are. And we have font size, which we can actually change now. You can see that if we make it low, it gets bigger and it gets smaller. We're going to reset that so it's back to normal. Okay, and then here we got icons. We have the checked icon. So if the button's checked, it's going to be whatever you load here. So let's say the button's unchecked, right? We can load in an art. So it's going to look like this if it's unchecked. If we click play, or if we hide the grid container and then we click play, it's going to look like this if it's unchecked. So it's unchecked, right? So this would be your off animation. This would be your unchecked animation for the button. If we click it, then it would load into our checked animation, which we would have to make a checked animation, right? So you would have a different one and it would load in. And of course it's not going to be this big, but you're going to kind of see this is unchecked and this is checked. Unchecked, checked, unchecked, checked, right? So that's kind of how that would work. And then you kind of have all these different animations. These are just for different things. So if you want the button disabled, well, what happens if the button's disabled? Well, you may want it grayed out. You may want it a lighter color, so it's not as detailed, right? So you know it's like, oh, this is not something that's able to be changed. Basically, that's how icons work. And then these are just styles. Like, remember earlier in the video when we hid the style box, which is a focus style box. So whenever we hover our cursor over it, it focuses on that little box that is built around it. Well, that's kind of what this stuff down here is. Self-modulate, if we make it back to black and we hide we reshow our thing, that's going to be kind of how you go and customize the buttons, right? So that hopefully explains how the theme area works and the theme section works. You can save these themes and you can load them in with a file by clicking a new theme, right? And then you can end up saving that theme and then reloading it onto other buttons so you can copy and paste it over to other things. So that is kind of how themes work, kind of how customization works. And a couple things I want to go over with alignment real quick before the video ends is when you're having all these containers, because if you're creating a big UI system, you have a big game, you have multiple menus, you have shops, inventory, like all this stuff, right? You're going to have a lot of containers and you're going to be dealing with them a lot. So the most important thing is to make sure that this box is the exact perfect size of what's in the container. So you're able to use the anchors and line it up perfect within the menus. So everything looks organized and it looks aligned, right? So that's going to be very, very important. let's say you have a bunch of tabs that go across the top. Make sure that's in its own container. You do not want tabs that go across the top to be in a different, in the same container as stuff that's going to be below, because then everything won't be aligned perfectly, and you need everything aligned perfectly for it to look good. Go through, let's say you're using containers and you want buttons. Make sure they're customized, right? Make sure they're customized, because this here does not, it looks kind of, it doesn't look very good, right? It just doesn't look very good. So you want to make sure you have a font. You want to make sure that everything is customized to the style of your game, whatever that may be. Maybe it's a farming game. Make sure everything is customized and it looks good. And just stay organized. So up here in the hierarchy, you can kind of see in the scene tree, we have everything here. This is obviously a very basic example, but we can close the color menu and you can see that everything in the color menu is under the color menu. So it's all stuck in here. So if we hide it, everything hides, right? But that's pretty basic knowledge, right? But you're going to have maybe multiple menus. Maybe you'll have menus in different scenes. It's just going to be a big different thing, because like your inventory UI is not going to be in the same scene that your shop UI is in, right? Completely different scenes. Your main menu UI is not going to be in the same UI as your inventory UI, right? So maybe the menu AI and the pause, the menu UI and the pause UI may be in the same area, but then again, probably not. So just make sure you stay organized. Make sure the container boxes are the size of the actual container itself. And then you should be pretty good to go, right? So that's kind of how customization works, a little bit of alignment. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this was able to help. If you have any questions, then please let me know in the comments down below, and I will be sure to get back to you and try and explain it in a better way to help you understand. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Until next time, stay safe and bye-bye.